And greetings, everybody. It's Dr. Brenda, and you are in for a special treat. It is Dream Week, and I have some special visitors. I'm so happy to welcome Patty Michelle to Dream Week. Welcome, Patty.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm so happy to be here.
So I've got your bio down here, and it's pretty extensive. So I'm going to give our folks a little bit of an introduction. You have a PhD in public health and a master's in health sciences. You've been a global public health specialist for 25 plus years, working in over 40 countries. And you're the co-founder and policy lead at Health Enabled and a professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And here's the fun part. I mean, it's all fun, right? Right. But, as a PhD, it's like, all right, that's the academic stuff. You are also the author of a middle grade fiction novel called The Antidotes Pollution Solution, which you wrote with your 11-year-old son during the pandemic. How cool is that?
It was awesome.
So, Dream Week, I was writing something today and I said, one of the most difficult questions, I actually don't like it when somebody says, "What's your dream life?" I already feel my anxiety ramping up and I'm getting a little bit nervous. And it's like, that's kind of high pressure stakes. So I like to kind of boil it down into, what, where do you find joy? And then how do you step toward that life? And, clearly you are very accomplished academically and career-wise. And I would love for you to kind of back up and tell us, were those your initial dreams?
Yeah.
Were there high expectations of you as a child, or did you just kind of break the mold?
Sure. So my parents are Egyptian immigrants. They came to the United States in the 1960s. My dad first to pursue his dream, which was to work with computers. And so in Egypt, he didn't have a real opportunity to do that. And he, applied for immigration to, any country where he thought he could work with computers. And so I find, to me, I think like the immigrant experience is a dream experience, is people come to a country like the United States because they have a dream that they're trying to pursue. And so I sort of grew up with that sort of, in that sort of environment. And on his first day of looking for a job in the United States, he got a job in data processing and had an amazing career in computer programming, went back to Egypt, married my mom. She came over, decided that she couldn't be a stay-at-home mom between me and my younger sister. So she became a computer programmer and had an amazing career in computer programming. And so it's in that context that I grew up. But, as, the daughter of immigrant parents, who just happened to be good at math and science, there was a lot of pressure to, either be an engineer or a medical doctor. And so, so I, decided that I would, pursue the medical doctor route. And in that path, as an undergrad at Johns Hopkins, I discovered the field of public health, which was kind of like a lot more, instead of dealing with individuals one-on-one, you could like help millions of people at a time, which really, there was something about that really appealed to me. And so I had a 1 a.m. phone call with my dad to break the news to him that I was not going to be a medical doctor, but that I was going to, pursue this career in public health. But then more recently, I went back to my inner child and rediscovered that when I was a child, I was a much more creative person than I have been as an adult. And when I was 9, I won the art prize in my school for a piece of art that I had worked on. And I went back to some early writing that I had done when I was like in the 7th grade and found that like I really loved creative writing and art and, you know, music and theater and all of these different, much more creative expressions. But I had somehow kept them, you know, bottled up while I was pursuing this like amazing career in public health.
You know, that's fascinating, because I also find that I am very creative, and I'm a sociologist, and my idea was I could change society and change millions of lives rather than changing one person. So we're very much aligned there. But it's interesting that in pursuing sort of that academic career and the seriousness, I mean, we know the field, right?
Yeah.
What you're doing now might be fluffy, and it is elitist, I will say. And so at at what point did sort of this creative realization that I was good when I was a young kid at this creative stuff, I've quashed it down. What is it that made that emerge again?
Two things. I think one, having a child, and watching, you know, my son, you know, as a young, you know, as a very little child, have this like, you know, this like freedom, like that, you know, nobody tells you that you're like not good at anything when you're little, right? Like that's like, you know, it's like express yourself, find, you know, find your joy, find your passion, find the things that you're interested in. And I think that, you know, looking at his sort of like the sort of that freedom of expression and that ability to just let go, and be creative, was very inspiring to me. And then I also had the privilege of meeting a New York Times best-selling YA author who had, you know, a very amazing career in the music industry, and then decided, you know, one day that she was going to write fiction and tell her family stories through fiction, Rita Septis. And so she, you know, like really inspired me to kind of like revisit some of those like old, you know, passions and dreams to write fiction.
It feels in many ways that we're pushed into a one-dimensional life. You've got your academics, you've got your family, but we're very multidimensional. I think all of us are. And so you found a mentor, which is fabulous. But once you start kind of breaking loose from the status quo, can you talk a bit about what that was like and whether you felt that you had the support that you needed and wanted to move forward?
You know, it like the first few years of writing, I had to, it's almost like you have to like learn what you don't know that you don't know. And so there was a lot of, oh wow, this is a lot harder than I, you know, thought it was going to be. I was like, oh yeah, like I'll just write fiction and it'll be fun and it'll be fine and it'll be, you know, and then but it took me a while to like break myself out of kind of like my like very sciencey academic
Oh,
writing approach into, you know, really embracing like characters and story and like learning craft. And, you know, and so I have like a full like, you know, adult thriller manuscript that is like, you know, has gone through like several revisions. It's like sitting in a drawer. You know, if it ever sees the light of day, you know, maybe not. Maybe I just needed to like get that sort of like out of the way. I have like a half written YA novel that I was told to like, you know, the subject matter was a little too sensitive for folks. And so they were like, you know, you're a very strong writer, write about something else. And
now I have to ask.
yes, you do. It was about school shootings. And I
Oh,
wanted to write you know, a YA piece on on school shootings, because it's become such like, an important part of
Yeah. Yeah.
like lived reality. And it's unfortunate that that's the case, but like I sort of felt like compelled to like try to take on like hard issues. And so that was a tough one.
Yeah,
And I may
it,
go back to it at some point, but
it
but then it sort of led me into the antidotes pollution solution, because at the same conference there was this kind of like ongoing discussion about the need for kind of like smart middle grade fiction, and really bringing like the sciences into middle grade fiction, and using it to like help entertain, but also educate at the same time.
it's, when you're looking at the younger generation, so your son's age, for instance, and as they must think as adults, we have screwed up the planet royally,
Oh yeah,
and we have allowed violence to touch every part of our lives, and divisions and hatred. It's got to be challenging to write and to create some optimism about the future, because these kids are growing up on a planet that is not going to be around much longer if we continue our pace.
absolutely, absolutely. But the thing I have to say that I appreciate about young people is that they have this like unencumbered like sense of like, we can do something about this. Like they are not quite, they haven't like
Not
kind of like
jaded yet.
given up. They're not jaded. They're not, they've got like a lot of, untapped energy. And a lot of really great creativity and ideas and solutions for some of the problems that we're facing. And so, to me, I think as much as there are, we are seeing a lot more like climate anxiety in young people, as well as kind of like frustration with the sort of the set of problems and the state of the world. But they're also kind of can do people. And so, to me, as parents and as teachers and as, caring members of a society, I feel like they're an amazing resource that we just have not really tapped into, to really think about like what are our problems, and how can we kind of like work together and come up with solutions.
Right, right. So, um, when you begin to sort of open up, maybe it's Pandora's box, but you open up that. So as a financial coach, it's like people think that I have to be practical. I'm going to go into this career and I have to make six figures, and then I have to have the house and the new car and do all this stuff. And a lot of times when we think about what we really want to do, there may not be a quick turnaround in money. You might have to sacrifice the finances temporarily to follow that joy. And sometimes, the money doesn't follow. So it's like, is that an area where, you come from a very there's lots of achievement in your family, the expectations are high. Is there the sense that what you're doing is maybe frivolous? I mean, can you go a little bit more into, you're doing something that may or may not make money, but it lights you up?
Yeah. No, and there definitely is that kind of tension between, the things that we get paid to do and the things that we actually like have to invest in because we want to do them. I mean, so I've had to invest my own, like my own resources into, taking classes and learning a craft, and and kind of like supporting myself through the writing learning process and journey and all of that. And then coming out the other side, you're like, oh yeah, now I have a book. And then you're like, oh, but like then there's all of the marketing and the PR that surrounds it. And so it's not the case of like if you build it, they will come. It's very much you know, and I remember this from my early days working in public health. There's like a lot of hustle that you have to you have to do, like you have to put in the effort and kind of, you know, put yourself out there to get to the things that you really want to get to. And everything is a learning process. And it's, you know, it does often feel like one step forward, like 8 steps back. I mean, it was incredibly beautiful when my dad, who does not like to read, read The Antidotes Pollution Solution. And he said to me in his like beautiful, like thick Egyptian accent, you know, Betty, this book is very important. He's like, we should have it translated into Arabic so Egyptian kids can read it. You're just like, okay, great, Dad. Thank you,
That's
Dad.
terrific. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is really amazing, like affirmation. But then, like, you know, 3 family Zooms later, he's like, you have to sell more books. Like he's like, you're not selling enough books. And to sell more books, you should like, you know, do this and do this and do these things. And
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
like, okay, you know, like I appreciate the encouragement on one hand and like the business advice on the other hand. But
Yeah.
it's not all it's
Yeah.
cracked up to be. It's a tough.
Yeah. It's fascinating because like, you know, I'm living a life that I never imagined. It wasn't in my dreams 7 years ago. And all of a sudden, 5 years ago, you know, I've leaped into this other life. And there's a bit of yeah, it is I talk about like dream plan, save, do. You have a dream, make a plan, preferably save some money, and then
Yeah.
do it. And by far the doing is the most difficult part.
Yeah.
And so like how do you psych yourself up to actually go for it? Because there's a huge difference in this world between the talkers and the doers.
Yep.
Lots of people talk. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people said, you're living my dream life. And I'm like, well, you can live your dream life too.
Yeah.
So how do you get to be go from a talker to a doer?
Not easy. And I can tell you, I talk more than I do sometimes. And but I have done, and I'm very proud of, you know, like getting myself over that sort of like finish line, at least with the first book. And so it does take, you know, a lot of tenacity and like commitment to kind of like that vision. I mean, I think it's really, you know, having a vision and having a sense of like what it is that you're trying to do, and then really like following through on it. And I remember my first conversation with my PhD advisor when I was doing my PhD in London. And, you know, he sat me down and he was like, you know, you need to make sure that this is a subject that you are not going to get sick of in the next like 5 years. And so he really put it into perspective for me. And I think that really helped me because, you know, doing a PhD, it is like you're basically writing a book, like you're doing research and you're writing a book. And it takes, a number of years to kind of work your way through that process. And it's lonely. And you have to be like super self-motivated to actually get yourself through that process. And so I think that really helped me. Kind of like it's sort of like muscle memory. Like once you've done something that you can look back on and kind of see how you got through it, then it makes like other things, even if they're different, kind of similar to that. And in my field, like, I was the first person to do a PhD on cell phones and health, and people looked at me like I was like batshit. Oh, so you're sorry, am I not allowed to say
that's
bat
okay.
beat? And they were like, oh my gosh, like, nobody has a cell phone. Like, what are they going to do with these things? And then, and now, you look back on that. And so sometimes you also have to look at things in much longer horizons. I think we think that things should happen like yesterday, right? Like today I'm going to decide to write a book. Within a year, I will like write a book and it'll be published and it'll be out in the world. And, and like 2 years later, you're like, oh, like maybe it takes a little longer to like write the book and get it published. And, yeah.
So we both dabble in AI.
Yeah.
And so hopefully folks in Dream Week know, because that's day one. We play around with Chat GPT. But I find that there's when you talk about dream life or even things that bring you joy, people are so engrossed in the day-to-day, getting up, going to work, taking care of the kids, taking care of the house, the yard. They don't have the time to dream. We're giving them a whole week to dream. And those dreams can feel very vague and cloudy and muddy. And so what I find is that I'm starting to use Chat GPT. And if you get the prompts right, you know how this goes. It comes up with some beautiful, beautiful stuff. I feel like it's an imagination opener. So I feel like, we do have this tool now, but when people do come in and they're like, you know what, I'm in Dream Week. I know I'm not real happy with where I'm at right now, or I know I could do more, but I am not sure what that looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have any tips on how to kind of like just allow your mind to go? I mean, you talked about like going back to childhood and realizing how creative you really were. Is that maybe part of the ticket?
I think it is. I think we all have to. I just came back from like a middle grade camp retreat at like the Highlights Foundation with one of my favorite middle grade fiction writers and authors. And they had us, kind of go back into our like middle grade selves. And, and some of the exercises were like absolutely fantastic because or writing a letter to yourself, like writing a letter to your, 7-year-old self, your 8-year-old self, your 10-year-old self, and even just the act of remembering who like I was when I was, 9 or 10 or 11, and the things that I was into and the disappointments that I had, or the dreams that I had, or the first crush that, and so sometimes, getting back to our like childhood self before the self-criticism and like the inner voices kind of kicked in that tell us, it's not worth it, or, you're not going to be good enough, or imposter syndrome, or like any of the things that like we feel, that kind of like hold us back and kind of get in the way.
Yeah.
I also think getting off technology can also help, like getting onto just like, I find like even just like a blank sheet of paper and like a pen or a pencil, and just, just writing down, thoughts about kind of like, if one of my favorite exercises that I do a lot in my work, because I do a lot of strategy work, which is, which involves a lot of like vision setting and and that kind of thing, is, like, what will a newspaper say about you in, 5 years from now? If you're successful at what you're aiming to do, like, what will it say in the paper? What do you want, the headline to read? And then, okay, like, what would it, and then you kind of have to take a step back from that, and you have to say, okay, well, what would it take to get to that place of, like, what's in there? Yeah. Or even vision boarding. I mean, I love vision boards. I love, like, cutting out pictures and words that inspire you, and then, assembling them. And every time I do one, I try to do one every kind of like 6 to 12 months. It tells me kind of what's happening subconsciously, and sometimes, like, things that come up in it are more in the creative world, and sometimes more in my public health world, and sometimes they're more, it's more about family. And it really helps me then kind of figure out, like, kind of get a better understanding for, like, where I'm at in that moment.
Right. It's I just wrote down focus, because
Yeah.
we live in a world where people's attention span is 3 seconds. So I have to sell my programs in 3 seconds. You have to sell your book in 3 seconds. And it's really a detriment to chasing a dream, because we're just little flies buzzing around this light bulb, and we're moving in so many different directions. And to really write a book, to pursue something, requires focus. So have any suggestions on, I mean, you talked about, like, just getting out a piece of paper, shutting everything off, and that's probably necessary. But you've also talked about revisiting, like, your vision board, because our dreams change, our values change, our dreams change. So it isn't necessarily a failure to move into a different direction.
No, and sometimes, and so every step forward is a step towards something, right? So, and it's towards, like, where you're going in your future. Now, it may not look exactly the way that you thought it would. I mean, I went through, for the last year, I have been actively working on book 2 of the Antidotes series, only to come to the conclusion that the book that I'm currently working on is not an antidotes book. It's a very different book. And but none of that is wasted, because there's, like, so much that I wrote, and I wrote the first full draft, and and so, but, I can use, like, 80% of it, and I can actually repurpose some of the YA novel that I had written, like, and really parked into the Wayback Machine. And so I would also, like, no life experience is, like, wasted. It just is. It's who we are. It's what we are. There's no, like, and it is what we bring into, whether it's, like, our reimagining of our dreams, or, course correcting and kind of, like, taking a slightly different path, because that's more natural. And especially in creative pursuits, because people are like, oh, like, how do you know when your book is done? And if you ask any author, they will tell you it's never done. Nobody ever thinks that anything that they have ever done
Well,
is done. I mean, you can get to a place where it's good enough to get out there. It's good enough to share. It's good enough. But people are always like, oh, I could have done, I should have had this person do this,
yeah,
or I
yeah.
should have had this person do this. And but nobody knows that, right? Like, so when you put stuff out there, like you might be like stressing out about it, but but people, like, when you feel confident and comfortable enough for it to be out in the world. But a
Well, and
lot
there's
of times
yeah,
people, like,
yeah.
everything is like a work in
Yep,
progress.
yep, and there's always the sequel and episode 2 and the next series. And so we're gonna start to wrap up. I've got one question, and then I'd like for you to let people know how they can get in touch with you. So my question, here's the headline.
Yeah.
Patty Michelle, 5 years from now, what does it say?
New York Times bestselling author mobilizes a social movement of young people that are identifying problems in society and coming up with solutions using science, technology, engineering, and math.
Wow, I love it. That's fantastic. So how can people get in touch with you? And I will drop the links into the description.
Yeah, no, reach out through my website, www.patricia Mechael, my name is spelled Mechael.com. And please do, sign up for the Antidotes community newsletter, and do be in touch.
Well, thank you so much, Patty, for joining us in Dream Week. And I can't wait to see that New York Times bestseller. So you can do it. Thank you all.
I'm hoping. I'm
Thanks for joining
striving.
us.
Every day is a step closer.
Excellent. Okay. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.